I've always been fascinated by the unknown. You know, those stories you hear about late at night, the kind that make you double-check the locks on your doors, or the ones that make you turn off the lights and regret it instantly. For years, I thought I had a handle on it, a kind of morbid curiosity, a thrill of fear without the consequence. But that all changed when I found myself entangled in a series of events that still haunt me to this day. It started with a simple idea. I wanted to gather real scary stories, the kind that blur the line between fiction and reality. I wasn't looking for typical urban legends or tales that felt rehearsed. I wanted the truth, raw, unnerving experiences from ordinary people. I put out a call on various forums, asking people to send me their encounters with the paranormal, the unexplained, and the downright terrifying. The responses I received were overwhelming, more than I had anticipated. At first, it was exciting reading about shadowy figures in bedrooms, eerie whispers in the middle of the night, and strange things seen out of the corner of the eye. But one email stood out among the rest, and I wish now that I had never opened it. The email came from a man named Kevin, and it was unlike anything I had ever read before. His words were laced with desperation, fear seeping through the screen as I read his account. It wasn't just the content of his story that unnerved me, but the way he described the events, disjointed, almost frantic, as if he was struggling to hold on to his sanity. "Please," the email began, "you have to hear me out. I don't know who else to tell, and I'm not sure how much time I have left." My curiosity spiked, and I found myself reading faster. Kevin went on to explain how, for the past few months, he had been experiencing something unnatural. It started small, a feeling of being watched, odd cold spots in his apartment, things moving from where he had left them. But it quickly escalated. He began hearing voices in the dead of night. Not whispers, but clear voices calling his name. He lived alone, so there was no one else who could have been speaking to him. Then, the apparitions started. He would wake up in the middle of the night, unable to move, and see a figure standing in the corner of his room, just watching him. No features, no face, just a dark, looming presence. "I think it's getting stronger," Kevin wrote. "I don't know how else to explain it, but every night it gets closer. Last night, it was at the foot of my bed. It didn't move, but I could feel it, watching me. I'm scared to sleep, scared to close my eyes. I don't know how much longer I can do this." By the time I finished reading, a chill had crept up my spine. It was one of the most disturbing accounts I had ever come across, but something about it seemed real. Too real. I felt compelled to respond, to ask him for more details, to understand what he was experiencing. But before I could hit reply, another email from Kevin came through. It was much shorter, just 2 words, "It's here." I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, waiting for something, anything, more to come through. But that was the last I heard from Kevin. Days passed, then weeks, but no follow-up email ever arrived. I tried to track him down, but every attempt led to a dead end. It was as if Kevin had vanished, leaving behind nothing but his terrifying story. I should have let it go. I should have chalked it up to a hoax, or maybe the ramblings of a man struggling with mental health. But something about his story stuck with me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I started having trouble sleeping, my thoughts consumed by the idea of something watching me from the darkness. And then it began. At first, it was subtle, small things that I could explain away. My keys going missing, only to turn up in the most obvious places. Lights flickering in my apartment. But then, Late one night, as I sat in my living room, I heard it. A voice. Faint, almost imperceptible, but clear enough to send a jolt of fear through my body. "Help me." I froze. The voice had come from the hallway, the same hallway that led to my bedroom. Slowly, I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, and took a step toward the hallway. As I approached, the temperature seemed to drop, and I could see my breath misting in the air. "Help me," the voice said again, this time louder, more desperate. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, but there was no answer. Just silence, thick and oppressive. I took another step, then another, until I was standing at the threshold of my bedroom. The door was ajar, and the room beyond was pitch black. I reached for the light switch, but the moment my hand touched the wall, I felt it, an icy, bone-chilling cold that shot up my arm. Before I could react, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and for a moment, I thought I saw something, just a shadow, slip beneath the door. My rational mind told me to leave, to get out of the apartment, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood there, staring at the door, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then, from the other side of the door, I heard it. A slow, deliberate scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across the wood. I backed away, my pulse roaring in my ears, but the sound continued, growing louder, more insistent. It felt like hours passed as I stood there, paralyzed by fear, listening to whatever was on the other side. Finally, the scraping stopped, replaced by a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap. 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 I don't know how long I stood there, listening to that eerie tapping, but eventually, I forced myself to move. I grabbed my phone and dialed a friend, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what had happened. She was concerned, of course, but I could tell she didn't really believe me. Still, she agreed to come over. When she arrived, the tapping had stopped, and the apartment felt normal again. I hesitated before opening the bedroom door, but when I did, there was nothing unusual. The room looked exactly as I had left it, the bed neatly made, the curtains drawn. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something was still there, watching me. My friend stayed with me for a few hours, and by the time she left, I had almost convinced myself that it had all been in my head, that maybe I was just overtired, that I had let Kevin's story get under my skin. But as soon as she was gone, the apartment felt different again. The air seemed heavier, the shadows darker. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every creak, every gust of wind outside my window made my heart race. I kept expecting to hear the voice again, or the tapping, but the night passed in silence. The next day, I tried to go about my life as usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The strange occurrences continued, doors opening on their own, lights flickering, that unnerving sense of being watched. I began to dread the nighttime, when the apartment felt most oppressive, most alive. It wasn't long before I began seeing it, the shadowy figure that Kevin had described. At first, it was just a glimpse, a fleeting shape in the corner of my eye. But as the nights went on, it became more distinct. It would stand at the foot of my bed, just like in Kevin's story, watching me. Always watching. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself that it wasn't real, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The figure became a constant presence in my life. At night, it stood at the foot of my bed, always silent, always waiting. During the day, I would catch glimpses of it in mirrors or reflected in the windows, a dark silhouette just out of reach. I no longer felt safe, not even in broad daylight. My apartment had become a prison, a place where the shadows had eyes, and they were always watching me. One evening, after another sleepless night, I decided that I had to get out. Staying in the apartment felt like staying in a haunted tomb, and I was suffocating under the weight of its oppressive atmosphere. I packed a bag and called my friend again, the same one who had come over the night the tapping began. I didn't explain everything, she wouldn't have believed me, and I didn't have the energy to try. "Can I stay at your place for a few days?" I asked, my voice trembling. She agreed without hesitation. She was worried about me. She'd been worried for weeks. My pale skin, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I jumped at the slightest sound, it was obvious that something was terribly wrong, even if I hadn't told her the whole truth. I drove to her apartment that night, the roads deserted under the dim glow of the streetlights. Every shadow seemed to shift and stretch, and I found myself glancing at the rearview mirror more often than I should have. I kept expecting to see it sitting in the back seat, that dark figure, just watching me. But the back seat was empty. When I arrived at her place, the relief was immediate. Her apartment was warm, brightly lit, and most importantly, it felt normal. It was the first time in weeks that I hadn't felt like I was being watched. We stayed up late talking, though I was careful to avoid the details of what had been happening to me. I didn't want to sound insane, and deep down, I wasn't sure she could help even if I did tell her the truth. I slept on her couch that night, the soft hum of the city outside her window soothing me into the first real sleep I'd had in days. But it didn't last long. At around 3 a.m., I woke up with a start. The room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamps outside, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. For a moment, I couldn't figure out what had woken me. Everything was quiet, too quiet. And then I heard it. A faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across the hardwood floor. I sat up, my heart racing, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was coming from the hallway, just outside the living room. Slowly, I turned my head toward the door, and there, in the dim light, I saw it. The figure. The same dark, faceless silhouette that had been haunting me for weeks. It stood there, completely still, its head tilted slightly as if it were studying me. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, paralyzed by fear, just as it had been the first time I saw it. The scratching sound stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent again. But then, it took a step forward. Slowly, deliberately. "No," I whispered, barely able to breathe. "This isn't real. This isn't happening." But it was. The figure took another step, then another, until it was standing just a few feet away from me. My mind raced, trying to come up with some explanation, some way to escape, but I was trapped. I could feel the air around me grow colder, the same bone-chilling cold that had filled my apartment. And then, it spoke. At first, the voice was barely audible, a low whisper that seemed to crawl through the room. It wasn't a voice I recognized, but there was something about it, something ancient, something malevolent. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered, the words dripping with malice. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, my muscles locked in place. The figure leaned closer, its faceless head looming over me. I could feel its presence, heavy and suffocating, like a weight pressing down on my chest. Suddenly, the lights in the apartment flickered. For a brief moment, the figure vanished, and I could move again. I scrambled off the couch, my heart pounding in my ears, and ran toward the door. I had to get out. I had to leave before it came back. Just as my hand touched the doorknob, the lights flickered again. The hallway was plunged into darkness, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The figure was gone. The apartment was silent, save for the sound of my ragged breathing. I didn't wait to find out if it would return. I flung the door open and bolted out of the apartment, running down the stairs and out into the street. The cold night air hit my face, and I gasped, trying to catch my breath. I stood there, shivering, my back pressed against the brick wall of the building. My friend's apartment was just above me, but I couldn't go back. Not now. Not after that. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking, and called her. She picked up on the second ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern flooding her tone when she heard the panic in my voice. "I have to leave," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I can't explain right now, but I have to go." "Wait, what? Where are you going?" "It's the middle of the night." "I'll explain later," I stammered. Just trust me." I hung up before she could respond. I felt guilty for leaving her in the dark, but I couldn't risk staying in that apartment a moment longer. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. I spent the next few nights hopping between different hotels, trying to put distance between myself and whatever was haunting me. But it didn't matter where I went. The figure followed. I saw it in mirrors, in reflections on polished floors, even in the flickering shadows cast by streetlights. It was relentless, always there, always watching. I realized then that I couldn't run from it. This thing, this shadow, had attached itself to me. I didn't know how or why, but it was connected to me now, feeding off my fear. There was no escaping it. Desperate, I began searching for answers, reaching out to paranormal experts, reading books on hauntings, anything that might offer some kind of solution. But the more I learned, the more hopeless it seemed. This wasn't just a haunting, it was something darker, something older. It was as if this entity had been waiting for someone like me, someone curious enough to reach out and let it in. And then, one night, I had a dream. At least, I think it was a dream. I was standing in a dark, endless room, the air thick with the scent of decay. In the center of the room stood the figure, watching me. But this time, it spoke again. "You let me in," it said, its voice echoing around me. "And now, you're mine." I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. The words echoed in my mind, filling me with a sense of dread so deep that I thought I might drown in it. I had let it in. I had invited it into my life by reading Kevin's email, by entertaining the idea that something could be real. But there had to be a way to fight it, to break the connection. I wasn't ready to give up. I started searching for rituals, prayers, anything that might sever the bond between me and the entity. I contacted a medium, someone who specialized in dealing with dark spirits, and she agreed to help me. We met at a small, dimly lit room in the back of an old bookstore, surrounded by shelves filled with dusty tomes and ancient artifacts. "You've attracted something very old," the medium said, her voice low and steady. "It feeds on fear, on doubt. The more you fear it, the stronger it becomes. What can I do? I asked, my voice shaking. How do I stop it? There's only one way, she said, her eyes locking onto mine. You have to confront it. You have to face it head on and refuse to let it have power over you. I didn't know if I could do it. The thought of standing up to that thing, of facing it again, filled me with a deep, primal terror. But I knew she was right. Running wouldn't help. Hiding wouldn't help. I had to face it. That night, I went back to my apartment, the place where it had all begun. I sat in the dark, waiting. I could feel the air grow heavy, the temperature dropping. And then, it appeared. The figure, standing at the foot of my bed, just as it always had. I stood up, my legs trembling, and took a deep breath. You don't control me, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. You're not welcome here. The figure didn't move, but I felt its presence intensify, the air around me growing colder. I'm not afraid of you, I said, though the lie burned on my tongue. The figure began to fade, its shape dissolving into the darkness. I stood there, my heart pounding, waiting for it to return, but